I remember when Audeze used to be the only planar magnetic headphone brand easily found online. Then Hi-Fi Man and Monolith came on scene with mixed results. Now, more hi-fi companies have jumped onto the planar magnetic bandwagon and have been regularly releasing affordable options that undercut Audeze. Moondrop is no stranger to the planar headphone market. Now they've released their cheapest planar magnetic headphone, which they call the Pera. The folks at Shenzhen Audio sent the Pera for review. As you know, Shenzhen Audio is among a few online retailers that specializes in audiophile gear. These guys carry the typical products as well as some of the more esoteric gear. Check them out if you're looking to splurge this holiday season. Now, let's see what the $300 Pera has to offer. Moondrop says that the Pera uses 100mm planar drivers with a very interesting low impedance of 8 ohms. This should mean that the Pera can be easily powered by nearly any device. Funny enough, Moondrop claims that the Pera has, quote, scientific tuning and natural timbre. They claim that the sound signature is open, laid back, and high quality, whatever that is supposed to mean. They provide a frequency response graph which shows a bass roll-off, fairly flat mids, and a noticeable emphasis at the 3 kHz region. Moondrop says that the Pera has smooth treble. The company spends the majority of their marketing time underscoring the engineering behind the Pera and scant little on explaining sound signature. Whatever you think of Moondrop, you have to say that they are consistent in this regard. Let's turn to the build quality. It is stellar. The Pera is a large and somewhat heavy headphone. There's a good amount of metal all around, resulting in a headphone that is weightier than something like the Hi-Fi Man Sundara, but still lighter than the LCD2 and Aventone Planar. The Pera's ear cups swivel both vertically and horizontally, which should permit a more contoured fit. The headband is unpadded leather. The ear pads have a fairly large opening and sit around my ears. The ear pads are also easily replaceable using a magnetic attachment system. In fact, this is hands down the best mechanism I have found thus far, and it's not really proprietary. There's a magnetic ring which detaches from the ear cups. The ear pads sit over this ring. The ear pads have no special connection to the ring, and you can easily replace the ear pads with anything in the market that is sufficiently large to cover the entirety of the magnetic ring. Speaking of which, I am very happy to see that Moondrop includes an extra set of ear pads. In fact, the Pera comes with 2 variations. The one that is pre-installed is protein leather and velour. The additional set in the box is protein leather, solid. Unfortunately, I could not find any documentation about what sound differences the 2 earpads should present. The Pera comes with cloth-covered cable that transmits little to no microphonics. The headphone does not come with a carrying bag or any other relevant accessories. As for comfort, I was rather surprised at how easy the Pera wears. I was expecting a tight clamp, but the Pera has a gentle touch. I think the clamp force is lighter than the HD6XX and Sundara, and similar to that of the DT880. The headband does not press down on the top of my head in a painful manner. It does not cause discomfort over long listening sessions. Indeed, I had no trouble using the Pera for 3 to 4 hours at a time. In contrast, I have found the Sundara to be difficult to wear. Its clamp is much tighter and the ear pads do not make a complete seal as the Peras do. The Sundara's ear cups do not have horizontal swivel, which makes fit somewhat problematic. Ultimately, the Pera is a marvelous looking headphone. It is impeccably built. It is comfortable. It is well accessorized. I listened to the Pera for several weeks and used it as one of my go-to headphones for nearly everything when attached to my desk or portable player. I listen to lossless FLAC on my devices, streamed high-resolution audio from Amazon Music HD, lossy content from Spotify and Netflix, and watch shows and movies through other media. Throughout my testing phase, I used numerous sources with the Pera. This includes the Gustard H16 paired with my Cambridge CXN, the version 3XR, Mytek Brooklyn DAC Plus, Woo Audio WA7 Gen 2, Quad PA1, Low 2 PAW 6000, Low 2 PAW S1, and the EcoZerta ITM03. None of these devices struggled to drive the Pera. I conducted my tests initially with the velour hybrid earpads. I then switched to the pleather earpads. Unfortunately, since I do not have a second pair of Pera, I cannot do an A-B comparison, so I can't tell you how the two earpads actually compare. I will, however, provide a very general impression of the pleather earpads later in this review. With all that said, let's just talk about the overall sound signature. Moondrop does not say anything about the Pera's bass response. In my experience, I found the Pera to have a noticeable bass roll-off. Sub-bass can be rather faint, even at high volumes. In fact, when I paired the Pera with my Burson 3XR on high gain, the sub-bass was very quick and distant. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, the rumble that starts from the beginning of the track was barely audible on the Pera. In contrast, the Allo S5X and HD6XX had far more neutral presentation with more obvious sub-bass emphasis. Even the Audeze LCD2 Classic had a marginally greater sub-bass response. The Avantone Planar had more obvious sub-bass rendition as well, greater than both the LCD2 and the Pera, but not quite as good as the S5X and HD6XX. The Sundara's sub-bass presentation is pretty similar to that of the Pera. In other words, the Sundara has a very noticeable sub-bass roll-off. Separation of sub-bass and mid-bass on the Pera is quite good. There's no muddiness or muffled notes. In contrast, the HD6XX tends to blend the bass elements together. The Pera's clarity in this regard was also similar to that of the LCD2 Classic and the Avantone Planar. Mid-bass impact is slightly blunted and not sharp on the Pera. It sounds similar to what I heard on the Avantone Planar, but drum strikes do sound a bit more distant on the Pera. In Conquer and Irodori, the Pera had no trouble presenting the various drums and where they were located. The Japanese drums in Irodori retained their unique signatures, and I could tell where in the soundstage they were sitting. The LCD2 and Avantone Planar did not render any better placement in this regard. The Sundara had slightly less impactful drum hits compared to the Pera, and drums generally sounded a bit further away from the ears. The mids were clear and distinct on the Pera. Vocals stand apart from instruments. In Orla Gartland's Why Am I Like This, the Pera clearly rendered her voice even when all the elements played at maximum. This track has some recorded sibilance and vocal grain, which the Pera did emphasize by a few decibels. In contrast, the LCD2 had sharper emphasis of sibilance and grain. The Avantone Planar had a neutral, unemphasized presentation. The Sundara also did not emphasize the vocal sibilance or grain. In Want You Back by Haim, the Pera again showed that it does marginally emphasize vocal sibilance, but it was also able to easily parse out the three vocalists, placing them in their respective positions on the soundstage. The Avantone Planar had a bit more clarity in this respect. The LCD2's clarity was no better than that of the Pera, and the Sundara pushed the vocals further away from the ears while still separating them from the various instruments, not too dissimilar from the Pera. Moondrop says that the Pera has smooth treble. I have to agree. In fact, I think the Pera's treble is very close to neutral. Now, there seems to be a nominal mid-treble dip, which becomes obvious when compared to the LCD2 Classic. However, when doing a side-by-side with the Avantone Planar, the difference is less noticeable. The Pera's treble presentation is similar to that of the Sundara, though I think the Sundara has a bit more energy in the mid-treble. Brass and horn sounded clear and distinct on the Pera, but they were not the sharpest. For example, in Scherzo for X-Wings, the Pera did not push these instruments to the forefront, unlike the LCD2, which did. On the other hand, the Pera did allow me to listen to higher volumes with less fatigue. Moondrop does not make any specific claims about the Pera's detail ability. In my experience, I think it's above average in this respect. I never struggled to hear obvious or even some subtle details, but the Pera is not a detail monster. It will not deconstruct a recording and sometimes can gloss over the more minute details in a mix. Twangs of guitar strings, sharp intakes of breaths, multiple vocalists, gravelly natures of voices, creaking of wood, electric buzzing effects, these types of details are present. But layered vocalists or soft sounds of wind intertwined with cello violins, or the soft thud a guitar makes as it is gently rested on the floor, now those types of details can go missing. In my new light footstep test, I counted 11 clear footsteps. The Neumann NDH-20 presented 5 to 6, the HD6XX and LCD-1 each rendered 7, the LCD-2 Classic presented 7 to 8 at max, the S5X presented 10, the DT1990 and Avantone Planar rendered 10 to 11 each. In regards to soundstage, the Pera seems to have a reasonably wide rendition. It is wider than the HD6XX and LCD-1 and sound as wide as the Sundara and Avantone Planar. Remember, soundstage is an impression brought on through the original recording, earpads, and whether the headphones receive sufficient power for peak performance, among some other factors. So your impression might be a little bit different. Ultimately, the Pera has a unique sound signature. It presents a bass roll-off, slightly forward mids, and a gentle, mostly neutral treble. The detail and soundstage ability is quite good. I mentioned earlier the solid pleather earpads. Since I don't have a second set of Pera to compare, I cannot give a confident assessment of the sound signature with the alternative earpads compared to the suede or velour earpads. What I can say generally is that the solid pleather earpads seem to marginally elevate bass, decrease some clarity, and give the impression of slightly narrower soundstage. Sadly, I cannot say more beyond these very general statements. That's the limitation of trying to compare things based entirely on memory, which is a terrible method of comparison. Regardless, I do think that the two earpads affect the tuning, and do so in different ways. Of course, if you do not like either earpad, you can easily find something else from a wide price spectrum and fit those onto the Pera. I am quite impressed with Moondrop's newest headphone. Some people will complain about this or that in the sound signature. Not enough bass, not enough clarity. Others will claim that this headphone is the best thing since last week's sliced bread. And who doesn't like stale bread? I can't say that the Pera is the best in anything, nor will I claim that the Pera fails in any real respect. It is a unique headphone, and I appreciate it for that. Its build and comfort are superb. Finally, we get easily replaceable earpads and a second set in the box. Two things which can be true at the same time. Hallelujah! The sound signature, as I described, is probably not going to blow the socks off of a good number of people. For example, if you want a bassy response or even a more neutral presentation of bass, then the Pera may not be the right fit for you. Anyone who can't stand even a slight amount of sibilance may want to stay away unless they feel comfortable making minor EQ adjustments. And of course, those who want a brighter headphone will find the Pera a dull-sounding presentation. However, I think the Pera has a modicum of vocal emphasis mixed with a wide soundstage and a rather comfortable treble, something that might be suitable for a wide variety of music that does not heavily rely on bass. The Pera at $300 is a brilliant headphone. If you think this kind of sound signature might be your cup of tea, then the Pera should be on your list of headphones to dig deeper into.